in Mexico and a lot of other places that I've been to, for example, in Latin America, people work to be able to live, right?
Hmm.
People work to enjoy life.
Yes.
In the US, they live to work. It's all about working more, stronger, harder, better job, better title, better salary. If
Better
you want
car, better
better
house.
car, better house, keeping up with the Joneses. Welcome to the Entrepreneur Expat, where we believe in building freedom through entrepreneurship, adventure, and connection. I'm Justin Keltner, and I'm an entrepreneur that's been living overseas for the greater part of the last decade. On this podcast, we're on a mission to connect entrepreneur expats and aspiring expats together to create a global community of freedom seekers. Each week, we'll feature new episodes about living overseas as an expat, as well as tips to grow your business. We also interview 6- and 7-figure expats and other experts to inspire you, educate you, and connect you to this big wide world. It's great to have you along the journey. Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Entrepreneur Expat. I'm Justin Keltner, and I'm here with my partner, Amanda Bea.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural episode of our adventures as expats and also building a community of entrepreneurial expats all around the world.
Yep, it's great to have you here along for this journey. We're actually coming to you from Guadalajara, Mexico. We've been here together for about the last 3 months.
3 months. Yeah. So I'm newer to the expat journey. It's something I've been wanting to do for many, many years. Justin and I met. He'd already been an expat for how long?
On and off for the greater part of a decade.
Yeah. So
Probably total like over 6 years. Yeah.
over 6 years as an expat, and you lived in Colombia and Mexico.
Colombia, Mexico, all over the US, different parts of Europe as well, mostly Central and Eastern Europe.
So I was fortunate enough to have Justin in helping me adjust to moving to a new country. It's a dream I've been living out. And ever since I started sharing the journey on social media, with my other brand, Make Money Your Honey, we'll get into what we do momentarily. Then, people have been asking so many questions like, how did you move overseas? Or, hey, I've been looking into Mexico. Or, how do you handle real estate? Or, we've also been meeting a lot of people who live in other countries like Costa Rica or Portugal. And there's also this trend happening of more Americans and Canadians, Europeans and Australians leaving what would be considered the Western world. So because we were getting so many questions in the DMs and so much interest on social media, we decided to, band together and kind of create a community where all of us could share advice, connect with each other, share our stories, because boy, do we have stories, and really help answer people's questions either because they're already entrepreneurial expats or they're aspiring entrepreneurial expats.
Yep, that's a good summary and a good story of how we got into this. And I've also been wanting to share a lot more of this journey for quite some time. And thanks to Amanda, we're actually creating some real tangible ways to do that. And like she mentioned, to really build community, because all of this is about community. Yes, having a location independent business is great. Yes, living overseas has a lot of benefits, but I think the biggest thing that we're trying to do is not only share our knowledge and our wisdom with the world, but really build a community of like-minded people around us, and to be able to support each other, to be able to learn from each other. That's really the idea behind what we're doing. So, Amanda, I'm curious, what was it for you at the very beginning? Because a lot of people listening to this maybe are just looking to take that first step into becoming an expat, into moving overseas, into looking at either an expatriate or a digital nomad type of lifestyle. What was it for you that kind of first, I guess, tickled that interest for you of wanting to do that?
My gosh, we'd have to go back like 13 years or something like that. So many, many years ago, back in 2010, I graduated from college. It was the Great Recession. I just dated myself. It was the Great Recession. and I couldn't find a job for 6 months. And I had a friend at the time who noticed I was struggling. He handed me a book. It was The Art of Nonconformity by Chris Guillebeau. Note, we should have Chris Guillebeau on the podcast. If anybody can make that happen, please hook it up. And in that book, The Art of Nonconformity, he talked a lot about making your own money online. And he had this goal of visiting every country in the world, I think before he turned 35. Pretty sure he did it. And I was just intrigued because no one had ever told me this was possible. I come from an immigrant family. My parents are Cuban. My whole life was like, the United States is the American dream, and we're going to go through the immigrant struggle. So I had this relationship with the US, which was like, hey, this is like the best country in the world, why? But at the same time, I have these roots in Latin America that I've never really gotten to explore. I speak Spanish. That makes my life a whole lot easier for traveling. Why don't I just figure out how to like make my own money online, and then I can travel all over the world? And long story short, I ended up being a freelance writer for financial companies specifically. I ended up niching down. I did that for 8 years. You can Google it. I've done stuff for TransUnion, Capital One. I wrote for places like Credit Karma, financial brands most Americans would recognize. I was, one of their bloggers basically, or I would get hired as an influencer. And I ended up having a book called Make Money Your Honey. I still have a podcast called Make Money Your Honey. You should go check it out. And that morphed. And throughout that process, I actually ended up traveling quite a lot throughout the United States and then a little bit internationally. And, that business morphed into another business, which is how you and I met, actually. And I was a sales trainer. I was starting to teach online marketing and specifically sales and how to have sales conversations through a program called Persuade to Profit, which also still exists, persuadetoprofit.com. And in that process, I started teaching people how to build their own online businesses because I had done it for 8 years. People were like, how did you do it? So I really started getting into that in 2018. No, 2017 was when it started. 2018 was when I started doing that business full time. 2019, I was like, all right, well, I'm going to go back to my original dream, which was to travel the world, go to other countries, live in other countries. And in order to do that, and this might be a podcast episode for another time, I made up all these stories about how complicated it was and how
Hmm.
complicated my business needed to be and how much money I needed to make in order to accomplish that. That's a podcast episode for another time. But basically, I went all in, right? And, I did get to travel a little bit more internationally, was still traveling for work. I'd started reading guys like Nomad Capitalist, that YouTube channel, and listening to his ideas about like, because I'm still a financial nerd at the end of the day. So I was obsessed with Nomad Capitalist because it was like, hey, here's this like entrepreneurial stuff, right? Here's all this travel stuff, and here's all this nerdy financial stuff. So I was like, oh my God, I found the best YouTube channel ever. um, so that was in like 2019. And I, thought I needed this huge business, whatever. I was really going in on that, trying to build something big. And then I was like, great, I'm going to start traveling again. I'm going to go to Colombia and I'm going to go to Mexico and I'm going to do all these things. And then COVID happened.
Probably not the best time in the world to have
Not the best.
aspirations to travel.
No, I got really depressed. I actually stopped watching all the travel channels that I used to watch because it just depressed me during COVID. After a few months, I got out of the depression. I was like, great. I mean, eventually the world's going to open up again. Definitely saw some things going on during COVID
Hmm.
that were not making a whole lot of sense, which is why a lot of people want to leave the West. But again, conversations for another time. And I started making playlists like, oh, here's what it's like to live in Mexico City, or here's what it's like to live in Medellin, Colombia, which at the time that I was doing that, he was living in Medellin, Colombia, but we just didn't know each other.
Yep.
um, and I was making these playlists on YouTube, just kind of like preparing myself. And then I would make like test trips. I'm like, great, okay, I'm finally gonna do this. And I started planning a trip to Colombia. and to check out Medellin for a while. That was the original plan. And then I was like, great. And then I'm going to check out Mexico City and then I'll decide what I want to do. And my dad got sick. So I was not able to do that, right? So again, I felt like, okay, all right, this has to be put on hold again. But long story short, it's just like been this like burning dream and burning desire for over a decade. And then, went through a lot of changes in the business, went through a lot of changes in my life, met this one right here, and we had a lot of the same values and goals. We started as work colleagues, then turned into friends, then it turned into I'm here in Mexico with him.
Seems like just yesterday.
Seems like just yesterday, but it's been like a year. Actually, almost exactly a year. Um, I think next month it'll be exactly a year. And, I saw that he was already doing it. And I was like, okay, well, that's probably someone I could ask questions or whatever, like when we first met before we even like got together. And then that was it for me, right? It's just like a dream I've had for a decade. And I was pretty well traveled in the United States. I started becoming well traveled internationally. Then, it was just like me making up a bunch of stories in my head about how complicated I had to be, I think was part of the problem that was stopping me from doing it. I think, COVID happening,
Let's go through
life
some of those
happening.
things. The
Yeah.
complicated thing that you mentioned. What are, because I'm sure our listeners are really curious and maybe even have some of the same concerns that you did at the beginning. And I'd love to talk through some of those things, both maybe how you solved them, Amanda, and also how I was able to solve those things, because there's probably some insight there to be gleaned from us both as we've had kind of our own different journeys. What were some of those things? I mean, is it the finances? How do you buy things overseas, transferring money, flights, insurance? I mean, go through kind of the world of that and what what some of the some of the first things that came up in your mind were that you felt like you needed to address.
Well, here's one, and I think this one's more common for women, and that's why like female solo travel YouTube channels kind of tend to take off. I thought because I was a woman that there was a little bit of an extra fear there in terms of safety and security. And that was a real one. That
Mm.
was big. And I feel like a lot of women probably experience that to some degree. So I think that was one of them. I think another thing was,
Let's talk about that really quick.
yeah,
So you're in Guadalajara, Mexico now.
I am.
This is the second largest city here in Mexico, behind Mexico City. Obviously, we haven't seen all of Guadalajara yet. We've been dealing with, well, we'll get to another segment later on in the show called Pickles and Predicaments. But we're getting into just a little foreshadowing. We've been getting into a
Pickles
lot
and
of
predicaments.
pickles and predicaments. That was actually Amanda's creation. She came up with that, but uh, so we haven't had a chance to explore as much as we would have perhaps liked to. But so far from what you've seen about Guadalajara, how do you feel in terms of just overall safety and security
Oh,
here?
it's fine. Right.
Compared to Miami, compared to
Yeah.
other places
I
you've
mean,
been
I've
in
been to
the West.
Mexico before, and I used to say, like, I've seen worse shit go down in Miami, like in my super affluent neighborhood, than I've seen in Mexico. And that was the first time I came to Mexico, where I was in Mayan Riviera and also in Chiapas, which is the southernmost state in Mexico. If you guys ever get a chance to go to Chiapas, do it. It is natural beauty. It is gorgeous. It's just wonderful. You still haven't been to Chiapas, right?
You've got to take me.
Okay, we're going to Chiapas. It's the trip that made me fall in love with Mexico was the trip to Chiapas. And basically, so I feel super safe here. I mean, I have an appointment now in like an hour. I'm gonna go walk by myself. Like it's not a big deal. Like I've taken Daisy out to walk at night.
Daisy's
Oh,
our fur child.
Daisy's the fur child. She's a golden retriever. And it's like anything, right? Like you have to know like which are the safe neighborhoods and which are not the safe neighborhoods. Same that I would at home in Miami, right? Like don't go over here. There's gonna be some shit going down over here versus this is a safe neighborhood. It's similar, it's the same.
I would argue that even some of the most, I don't know, quote unquote, dangerous neighborhoods here compared to places like even Los Angeles and a lot of areas like East LA or
He's from California.
yeah, I grew up in California. Lived there until I was about 20. But compared to like some places in LA, compared to a lot of places even in San Francisco, definitely Chicago, definitely parts of Miami. I mean, it's not really apples to apples because obviously there's different kinds of things in Mexico versus in the US in terms of safety and things like that.
There's a
But
different kind of violence.
yeah, here
Yeah.
I think that for the most part, and I mean I could be wrong, right? I've got still a limited perspective relatively. I've been in Mexico maybe a total of about 4 years, and I personally haven't really seen any kind of violence or anything like that here. Um, Most of what happens here, tends to be when you get involved with the wrong kind of things. You get involved with drugs, you get involved with prostitutes, you get involved with other types of like criminal activity. That's when things can happen, and that's when it's a lot more dangerous. But overall, walking down the street, I mean, sure, there's neighborhoods here that are popular with Americans where if you're holding your iPhone and you're on your iPhone and you're not paying attention, a couple guys could come by in a motorcycle and snatch it out of your hand.
Yeah,
But
that would be Colonia Americana.
yeah, but that happens most places in the world. I mean, I
Yeah,
would say in Miami, maybe not as bad because you don't have as much income disparity.
right.
But things like that, yeah. But in terms of violent crimes, as long as you're not actually involved with things that you shouldn't be involved with, I've seen Mexico to be a very, very safe place in it. And it's not the Mexico that it is 20 years ago either. It's evolving, it's becoming more safe.
It's very developed.
It's
Most
very
people don't
developed.
realize how developed Mexico actually is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They take Apple Pay here. Probably they didn't take Apple Pay in Colombia when I was there 4 years ago or so.
Yeah.
Maybe they do now, but like it's extremely developed. You wouldn't be able to tell aside from things being in Spanish in a lot of the city that you're even in a different place. Now you have a different vibe, you have a different culture, obviously,
Different value
different
system.
value system.
Yeah.
But that's something I actually like about Mexico. I would say that's something actually in the favor of Mexico and other parts of Latin America is that there's still a lot of traditional values, a lot of family values. There's a lot
Spiritual
of
value.
spiritual values.
Yeah.
Yeah,
On the
a lot
Make
of-
Money Your Honey podcast yesterday, I was interviewing one of my clients, Stacy Santiago, and that happened, right? Where she was talking about part of what's going on in the US right now is that it feels very disordered in
Mm,
terms of priorities and values. And I was thought to myself, and I was like, wait a minute, actually, now that I've been in Mexico for a while, and by the way, I'm Latina, right? It's like I get Latin culture. I just hadn't lived in Latin America. I grew up in the United States. I grew up in the West. But I had roots there. I knew what the vibe was. I just hadn't actually lived in Latin America. And now that I've actually been living here, I could see exactly what she was talking about. Whereas, like in Mexico, for example, the way that she described it was the way that she teaches her clients is like, faith, family, relationships,
mm.
the purpose, faith, family, and purpose. Those things come first. And then, you worry about money and all that kind of stuff. And I said, well, you see that in Mexico in a lot of ways. Because when we were traveling to Tequila, where tequila was born, and yes, we drank tequila. We highly recommend tequila.
We went on a tour actually in one of the tequilerias. Is that what it's
Tequilerias.
called? Like
Tequilerias.
the
Yeah,
something like that.
tequilerias.
The distilleries of tequila. We went on a tour and had some sampling and everything.
Delicious, right? They have like actual shrines
Hmm.
to like Jesus and the Virgin Mary. Guadalupe is a very big deal here. Sometimes in houses and ranches, you will see shrines. If you go to restaurants, you'll see La Virgen de Guadalupe. That stuff is very common here. It's a very Catholic country. It also has a lot of indigenous roots and things like that. But mostly it's a Catholic country. And it's almost like they put that first, and then there's a lot of value and emphasis placed on family and family relationships and relationships. And I actually think that's one of the reasons why, to Americans, for example, Mexico feels a lot less stressful.
Mm.
than it does in the United States. Now there's other things, right? Like there's pros and cons to every country, right? Like there's no perfect country in the world. It's not a thing. There's definitely cons to living here as well. But one of the things that I noticed was that different value system that exists here versus, for example, in the United States, whereas our client Stacy brought up yesterday, it was like survival programming that went completely unchecked
Mhm.
in the United States and in the West in general, which is why you're seeing a lot of the political turmoil. You're seeing a lot of the turmoil around the world where the West is involved. Um,
I want to get into that maybe more in
yeah,
another
and other
episode.
episodes, but
But back to
yeah,
some of the basics, right? Like going back to what you mentioned, so safety and security, we kind of
yeah.
touched on that a little bit. What were some of your other kind of initial concerns when you thought about moving or traveling overseas?
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted is I really wanted to explore. I really wanted to enjoy. I maybe because I'm Latina, we have a different value system, as I was just mentioning. I really place a lot of value on relationships, and I place a lot of value on family. So a very typical Latino value system, basically. And I thought that in order for me to really enjoy and explore, that I needed to have like this complicated business that basically ran itself. And the reason I thought that was because in my first business, when I was a freelance writer mostly, and I was a freelance content marketer, I would be in Chiapas hanging out with a friend of mine, my web designer, and then I'd have an editor emailing me and I'd be pissed, right? Because that business wasn't scalable,
Hmm.
right? Which meant that if I wasn't working, I wasn't making money. I didn't have systems in place. There weren't things I could sell that didn't require me to trade time for money, which is actually how I ended up moving into sales training. Was because I was having that frustration of like, oh man, I want to travel, but like I keep getting all these emails from editors and then I have to constantly work. Well, so I thought that because of that experience that I had in the first business, that in the second business, I'd built in some scalability. Like now we teach training programs, right? Like I teach sales. Together we teach something called Effortless Sales Engine. Because I was like, I can't have the business model I had before. So I tend to be a person of extremes, I've noticed.
Just a little bit.
And I'm like, well, that didn't work. So let me go all the way in this other direction over here, automate everything, have employees, have this, have that. And I basically overcomplicated my business and overcomplicated my life. I started off simplifying it and then it got overly complicated. Um, and that happens to a lot of business owners, and that's actually one of the problems that we solve in Effortless Sales Engine. And we'll have links to everything in the show notes that we mentioned if you guys want to go check it out. But basically, I had this idea in my mind that I needed this big machine of a business and other people doing things so that I could actually like move and travel and enjoy, or that I needed like a lot of money to be able to kind of start diversifying a portfolio, for example, which now that I think about it, literally makes zero sense in retrospect. But those were assumptions that I was making based on my experiences trying to travel with the first business.
So you
And
didn't think you could do it. You didn't think your business would allow you
yeah, I didn't think I could do
the
it.
movement, the freedom, the
Yeah.
location independence.
Yeah, the first best business definitely wouldn't have, right? And the second business had the potential, right? And that's the thing that's interesting what it's morphed into now. But I was like overcomplicating it, right? I was overcomplicating it. And I was right about the automation. So Justin actually helped me automate about what 80% of the business.
You said 84.
80 no, I he helped me reduce 84% of my tasks
That's true.
with the
That's true.
automations. And that's part of what we teach in Effortless Sales Engine. So I was right about that. I was right about automations. I was right about streamlining. I hadn't even really thought about finances and money, to be honest. And what ended up happening was when I streamlined the business, well, I was able to get rid of a whole lot of expenses, which makes a move a lot easier. And then I thought I needed like massive team and employees. So I'd been moving in that direction. And then I find out because of all the automations and things, it just didn't make sense for me to keep a big team because I just didn't need it anymore. And I found out when I arrived in Mexico that had I had American employees still working for me, that may have overcomplicated
Hmm.
my life with my taxes. So I kind of I was making a lot of assumptions. Some I was right about, like the automations, and others I was completely wrong about, like having, a big team handling most things.
So you simplified your business a lot
I
in
did.
order to be
Yeah.
able to have freedom. And the way, ironically, that you got to a much simpler business was by making it significantly more complicated because there was this kind of should behind it that you learned from the internet, that you learned from, some coaches. And unfortunately, a lot of coaches out there, what they want to do is basically sell you this new shiny thing because it's better marketing,
Hmm.
right? When we talk about some of the things that we do, for example, in our effortless sales engine program, it's actually, I hate to say it, but it's quite simple. It's quite basic. Have a funnel, get leads, capture phone numbers, follow up with people, and you can sell them whatever you're selling them. It's like, to be honest, in a lot of cases, sales 101.
Hmm.
And obviously there's nuance that we add to it. But just like we did with our program and other things that we teach, we had to go to a very big extreme in order to get to the point where things were actually really simple. So that's kind of the irony there. But you added a lot of layers of complexity based on what you thought that you should have to do. And then,
Because I thought it would make my life easier
yeah,
living overseas. Because I also was like, well, my life is going to get more complicated, but I think that's the American mentality.
tell me about that. So, why is it that people struggle with? I mean, let's take even moving outside of the US or Canada or the Western world, if you will. Like, let's take that out of the picture for a second and talk about mindset in general around just change. Why do you think it is that people put these big obstacles in front of them when they're about to have a big change or there's a big opportunity to shift their life?
Sales trainer hat is coming on right now because in learning sales, for example, which is what I've been doing for a very long time. And we'll have to do an episode on all the things that you've done. We're gonna have to do the
Yeah,
the reverse of this
switcheroo.
with a switcheroo. But basically, in sales, for example, when I'm teaching sales to a lot of our clients, it's a transfer of confidence, and you're just helping people believe that they can change.
Hmm.
It's not even really about money. It's not even about the product, really. I mean, we could go into things about how people are pitching the wrong products, but that's not what this is about right now. On like a big, like philosophical kind of view of sales, you're selling somebody on the belief that they can change. Human beings do not like change. I'm weird. I like change, right? I was like, moving to Mexico will be easy as soon as I met Justin. Right.
I'm gonna
Okay, he's
refute
gonna
that point very,
he's
very
gonna push me on
slightly,
that, isn't he? Yeah.
because we actually took one of Grant Cardone's programs recently. It was the 360 event where they did a pretty in-depth analysis of like personalities and working styles and things like that. And Amanda's actually very high on the stabilizer quadrant.
Influencer and stabilizer
Yeah.
quadrant. Yeah.
So I
Influ
don't know if it's so much that you like change. I think you don't like change. I think that you have enough what's the word? Self-awareness?
chutzpah.
Chutzpah too. That's a good one. It's funny because the Catholic here is telling the Jew about chutzpah, but
I've been told I have chutzpah.
you do
So
have chutzpah from
chutzpah.
chutzpah. Yeah, you got a
Chutzpah.
chutzpah.
Okay, so
Actually, I
like a
think that chutzpah. I think that's Yiddish, isn't that
it's
Yiddish?
Yiddish, I
It's
think.
that's not Hebrew.
Yeah.
That's yeah. My grandma spoke a little bit of Yiddish, but I digress. Um, you do have the chutzpah, but it's about having you've worked on yourself a lot, right? So you've done a lot of personal development, you've done a lot of introspection, therapy, growth, like all these different things, and you've been through a lot of shit in your life. And so even though by nature, I think in a big way you're a stabilizer and you like things to be a certain way and in a certain order and happen at a certain pace, right? Like today, um, you're open to change because you've worked on yourself, which I think is a big concept here. And one thing that we're definitely going to go into in a future episode is being open to embrace change.
Yeah.
I think there was something that happened because you weren't actually ready to move over here. Tell them a little bit about that story and about how, you wanted me to come and move back to the US. You wanted me to come to Miami. What
Yeah.
was that story and what was the shift that happened for you to actually finally be ready to embrace change? And I ask that because I think that a lot of people watching or listening are probably going through a lot of that similar type of pattern. So, what was that story? What was that process like for you?
Well, I think the scary part was like we were getting into like a serious relationship, for example,
Before we even
before
really
we
met in person.
before we even met in
Yeah.
person, we were long distance. That's a story for another time. But we were already in a serious relationship. It was long distance. And that was scary. So I think I was coming up against that. I think it was more about that than actually like moving. But I think there was also like a
Well, it
lot
was the change. The theme is change.
that still changed. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd been single for a long time. And then also, and this has to do with something that we learned while we've been here. We've taken a holistic healing class, and our holistic practitioner, he actually worked through some of this stuff with me, and I've worked on this stuff before. That I tend to struggle a lot with guilt.
Hmm.
I think this is common for a lot of people, where it's like, oh, my life is getting really good. I feel guilty. Let me go find a way to sabotage. That has to do with upbringing, that has to do with culture that I grew up in, that has a lot to do with like the religion I grew up in. So that's a pattern of mine, me specifically. I know that, but to your point, I've done a lot of work, so I'm self-aware when it
What
comes to
was
that.
that allowed you to actually, so in that process, right, of us getting to know each other, and then you wanted me to come to Miami, and then we realized, well, that's not really the best option. What was it that actually allowed you to leverage that self-awareness and to open up new possibilities and embrace that change and say, you know what, screw it, let's do it. I'm gonna come to Mexico. Like, what was that for you that really clicked that allowed you to change your
When I
perspective?
realized I manifested this, because it was literally like stuff I'd written out in journals. It was stuff I was visualizing. It was stuff that honestly I've had this dream for a very long time.
Yeah.
And it was right in front of my fucking face. Right. And I was like, oh, so when I made that connection, I think that's what gave me kind of like the courage, I guess. And I didn't know if I wanted to stay in Mexico. I did practically knew nothing about Guadalajara. I didn't really even Google anything before I got here. I really just came based on trusting you. And it was a little rocky the first few weeks. Stories for another time, some of the pickles and predicaments. And but then after like 6 of traveling around other parts of Mexico and then, really spending some time here, I was like, no, I could see myself staying. And I was, literally doing pros and cons lists in my head. I'm a Virgo moon, those of you who are into astrology. So I categorize my feelings and make pros and cons lists. And there were a lot more pros to live based on what I was seeing and experiencing. There were a lot more pros to living in Mexico than going back to live in the United States.
What are the top five in your opinion? And I think we'll kind of wrap on that because we're getting kind of up close to the end here. But what are the top five things you've seen so far here? And then I'll give mine if there's anything that you've left out in my opinion. But what are yours? What are your top five benefits of being here?
Cost of living, obviously, is huge. Oh, Zoom is doing the camera's
Oh,
doing the thing.
so yeah, if for those of you watching, I think we have reactions on. So when you go like this on the new Apple devices, I think I still have it turned on though. Maybe just one of us. Sometimes it does it, sometimes it doesn't, but it does a little weird thing with the
Yeah.
anyway on
Well,
screen.
anyway, cost of living obviously has a lot to do with it because you can live pretty well on not very much money. I mean, we literally, this is unusual, but I'll give an example. This is not typical for Guadalajara. We manifested a 3-story house. It's come with pickles and predicaments, right? In terms of like fixes and things like
Like
that.
rewiring an entire
Like
electrical
rewiring an
system.
entire electrical system, right? But anyway, story for another time. But it's come, a 3-story house. It's an older house, right? But 3-story house, 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, full kitchen, um, patios, we're paying $1,000 USD a month. Not even because the dollar's gone up. So I think it's less,
900, yeah.
like 900 US dollars a month for this house,
Mm.
right? Or even the repairs, right? Like there've been some repairs that need to be done because it's an older house, like rewiring of the electrical system. That is a hell of a story for another time. But what does it cost to rewire a 3-story house in Mexico versus the United States?
I mean, here, I think all in with parts and wire and everything will probably be at still under $1,000.
Still under $1,000 to rewire a whole house.
Yeah. And in the US, that'd be like easy 15, 20K.
Yeah.
Probably more.
Maybe more.
I don't think you can get an electrician to show up for under a few $100s to even
Yeah.
look at anything.
So
Yeah, if you can get them there.
yeah,
You know,
I mean,
we had people, we had two, well, not to get in the weeds of it, but we had people working around the clock almost for 2.5 days.
3 days straight. Yeah, like 3 days straight. Anyway, that's a story for another time. Pickles and predicaments. And so cost of living is obviously one of them. I think that's probably one of the top ones on my list because what do you do to build wealth, right? Well, you reduce expenses and increase your income. Hell of a lot easier to do that in other countries outside of the United States where you can still live really well, like really, really, really well. Like kings and queens practically, assuming you're getting paid in USD or Canadian dollars or euros or Australian dollars. Obviously, that's a part of the equation. But yeah, I come from finance. Money's a game. So I saw it as a game.
What else?
Other thing, life is way less stressful here. And I think, again, it's because of that different value system. There's a different value system here. And I think that leads to, at least coming from the American perspective, less stress, like a less stressful life. Like you get your work done for the day. You don't even have to make as much money, right? But of course, we're going to make as much money as we can because we're entrepreneurs and because why not? It gives you options.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have to. You don't have the stress of constantly needing to make money because the dollar just goes a lot further. But also, again, it's that different value system that makes it a less stressful life.
So I'll add something to that. People in the US in general, basically, well, in Mexico, so in a lot of other places that I've been to, for example, in Latin America, people work to be able to live, right?
Mhm.
People work to enjoy life.
Yes.
In the US, they live to work. It's all about working more, stronger, harder, better job, better title, better salary.
Better
You want
car, better
better
house.
car, better house, keeping up with the Joneses. Now it's just keeping up with how the Fed is raising interest rates. Now you can't even buy a house in the US anymore
Yeah.
like you could in 2021 when the rates are like 2.8%.
Yeah.
It was the lowest.
Yeah. Oh, point number 3, healthcare.
Mhm.
Let's talk about healthcare for a second, right? In terms of what made more sense. The minute I arrived here, this man had so many doctor's appointments for me because he's like, "Well, you're in Mexico for 6 weeks." This is before I knew I was staying. Like, we just got to take advantage, right? Healthcare.
Trying to take care of you.
You are, right? The private healthcare system is great. I mean, I was actually just watching a news piece. I forgot who had done it, but it was a recent news piece on medical tourism in Mexico of Americans coming here to do dental. It was mostly dental. That's what the piece was about, but it's dental, it's vision, plastic surgery. A lot of people go to Latin America for plastic surgery. But because the care, right, is better quality and doesn't cost you as much money. I can WhatsApp my doctors
That doesn't happen
in
the
Latin
US.
America.
That does not happen in this.
Like my eye doctor's been trying to figure out my glasses. He did house calls, did not charge for the consultation, all this shit that we bought between the two of us, right?
Oh, facials.
Oh, wait,
facials.
we're not there yet.
That's another thing.
That's another thing.
Manicures.
That's another.
That's
Beauty's
kind of
enough. I mean,
healthcare.
I guess it's wellness, right? But like literally all the stuff that we bought between the two of us for just our eye care. I mean, it was contacts for me, glasses for both of us. The glasses had like the bells and whistles and all the things. The eye doctors had to come here 3 times to figure out what's going on with my glasses. because my prescription changed so much. I mean, literally all of that, and it cost half of what my last appointment cost me in the United States. So, I mean, if I had to kind of figure it out, I would say like what I'm paying here for eye care is like a third of what I would be paying in the United States. I haven't done dental here yet. You have. Dental's next. But healthcare, right? You can WhatsApp your doctor. They will do house calls. One thing that I noticed in Mexico that you don't see that much in the United States anymore is like private consultorios, private practices.
Private practices, yeah.
Private practices, which are basically non-existent in the United States at this point, but in Mexico, there's still a lot of private practices. And it doesn't cost you that much money. Again, if I want to be clear, if you're getting paid in USD, in Canadian dollars, in euro, in Australian dollars, it's really not that much. And the level of care and quality is so much higher. One of our social media followers, Facebook friends, said she's Canadian. She'd gotten she's had healthcare in Canada, in Canada, in the United States, and in Mexico. She said Canada was the absolute worst.
For that too.
The United States wasn't that much better than Canada, plus it cost a hell of a lot more money, apparently. Mexico was the best. Mexico was the best level of care that she experienced between the three.
I'll say this too. People think, oh, like the doctors must be really bad here, and they say it's a third world country and all this other nonsense. Um, they think that people don't have, like, the doctors don't have experience here, that uh, they're not good, that you get what you pay for, all this stuff, and it's such such BS.
I guess because I'm from Miami and most of Miami were Latin, right? And half of Miami flies to Latin America every year to get medical work done anyway. I already knew that medical was good in Latin America. Didn't you say that Guadalajara has like a good medical school here or something?
It does, yeah. They have some of the best.
Yeah, some of the best in Latin America, right? I even noticed how therapy was different here because Latinos don't coddle people, which again I'm used to, but versus therapy in the United States where it was a lot of mothering energy and coddling, and that's why I didn't want to do it. But here in Mexico, it's like actually trying to get down to the root of a problem. That's the other thing. In Mexico, they actually try to solve the medical problem.
Not just get you
medicated.
Okay, so lightning round. Any other things that you would say, okay, what's a quick other pro or benefit?
The people.
Yeah.
The people are less stressed and more friendly. Yeah. Here, right? Like we're taking art classes. Our neighbor teaches art classes and we decided to start doing them. You have time for hobbies in Mexico. But we were doing art classes and I was noticing how everybody was like very chill, very friendly. I'm like, even if you were in an art class in the United States, everyone is so fucking stressed out just from living
and taking it really serious.
And taking it really seriously. Like, I have to be the best artist here, right? And that's like not a thing here. So I think that's definitely something that I've noticed. Not everything is a competition. So that would be a cultural difference. There's plenty of cons. We'll do a whole other episode on
That'll be an episode.
That'll be its own episode. Plenty of them, trust us. But how about you? What are your top 5?
That you haven't already mentioned?
Yeah. Or lightning round that I haven't already.
Yeah, okay. So this is actually kind of an interesting one because most people would not think this, but the infrastructure, especially internet, if you're in a big city like we are, it's very, very, very good. Arguably better than in a lot of places in the US. I have less downtime on my internet here in Guadalajara. We have a discount. I negotiated it all down to, so we have a discount, and with that discount, we're paying about, what is it, $25 to $30 a month for 600 megabit internet downstream and 120 upstream. And that would be not only 3 or 4 or 5 times the price in the US, but in a lot of cases, I mean, fiber is usually okay, but most of the infrastructure in the US is still old. They haven't put fiber in anywhere near as many of the cities as they have in a lot of Latin America because the US is so spread out. So even places like LA, Central Texas. I mean, Miami. I think you just got AT&T fiber there,
At my house, yeah.
like recently in the
Yeah.
last couple of years,
Yeah.
right? So like the infrastructure for the most part, a lot of the internet infrastructure is brand new. They've just built it because they've been developing so quickly, and none of it's like the old school, unreliable like cable network. So internet is actually quite good. I don't think we've ever had it go down here in
Never.
this house or
Not
well,
once. Not unless you accidentally unplugged something. That was
well,
the
that
only
was an accidental. I was doing
time.
maintenance on our network. I forgot to tell you.
Okay, wait. There's one that I know is really important to you that I forgot to mention. So this is probably one of yours. Food quality.
Oh, the food is excellent. So I'm not going to say that you go to a restaurant and it's that much better, although I think it is. It's definitely like value per dollar is significantly higher on the food here. You're paying about a fifth of the price for arguably much better food, but the groceries are just so much more fresh. There isn't as much of this like processed crap everywhere, and it's a lot more accessible. Like we've got within about a 15-minute walk a Walmart and a Soriana, which both sell fresh produce and groceries.
Plus, we have a bunch of fruit stands.
We have a lot of fruit stands. We
Yeah.
have a little neighborhood grocery store. Actually, two. We got one that's right on the corner.
Two
Like
carniceria. We
literally,
have a carniceria, which is like a butcher shop. We
uh-huh.
have tortillerias. We have
We can
delis.
buy fresh tortillas a block away or 2 blocks away from the
Yeah.
house where they literally are making it in the tortilla machine oven, however they do it, every single day, fresh. So you get a fresh thing of tortillas
Fresh bread.
for 15 cents,
Fresh
like a half a
Doritos.
kilo
Yeah.
tortillas for 15, 20 cents.
Yeah, food.
It's
Food
crazy.
convinced me to stay. That was one of the convincing factors for
Yeah.
me. I'm a foodie. And I was
Cool.
like, I like the food here.
So we got to wrap this up. Amanda, what's next? What are some of the topics we're going to be talking about
Ooh,
next?
okay. So topics we're going to be talking about actually running a business versus being a broke digital nomad. They are not the same. We have stories about that as well. We're going to be talking about, we've gotten a lot of questions about actually hiring overseas, so maybe we'll touch on that topic. We're going to be talking about pickles and predicaments, right? Because when you travel and you live in other countries, pickles and predicaments will happen because it just is what it is. So we're going to be talking about those. We have lots of really funny stories, not just from ourselves, but we're also going to be bringing on 6 and 7 figure expat entrepreneurs so they can share their stories and their tips and their pickles and predicaments. I think a conversation that's going to be coming up a lot is why more Americans and Canadians and Europeans and Australians are leaving the West.
Mm.
I recently saw something that more Americans were moving to Mexico than Canada.
Yeah.
Because Canada's basically the same shit. And that's a trend that's going to continue. So I think that's going to be some topics that we're going to be talking about. What else?
Pets,
Pets.
bringing pets.
Bringing pets overseas.
How to
Yep.
find, pet care, vets, groomers, all that stuff. Phone service, getting health care,
Yeah.
how to find good doctors. There, a lot of different things, just how to get set up.
Oh, bank accounts. That's a whole thing I've learned about.
Residency.
Residency.
So a little preview of what's to come.
Little preview of what's to come on this podcast.
Well, we've got to wrap this up now, but thanks for joining us here, Amanda. Thank you, dear viewer and listener, for coming along for the journey.
Make sure to subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review on Apple, because that will help us get this in front of more people. This is a conversation we need to be having, and we're trying to build a global community so all the entrepreneur expats can be connected. So if you want to move to another country, the idea is that we help you connect with people who are already there and can help you. But the only way for us to do that is for you to help us get this in front of as many people as possible.
Yep.
So make sure to subscribe, make sure to comment, make sure to share it with friends, make sure to leave us reviews. That actually does help us get it in front of more people. Make sure to give it a like wherever you're listening to it. Help us out with the algorithm, gods. In other words, because we need you in order to build this community, and those are very simple free things that you can do. And speaking of free, we have a gift. So Two things. Number one, we have a Facebook group that we're going to be starting. So the information for that will be below. So we kind of have like a meeting place and monthly meetups and things like that. So that's free thing number one. Free thing number two is a guide that we teach a lot of our clients. So we get a lot of questions about automating businesses and working online. So it's obviously a lot easier to live in other countries if you work online. And if you already have a business, it's a lot easier to move to another country if you have most of it automated. So we're giving out a free guide.
And if you want to get that, you can go to entrepreneurexpat.com/guide. And we're also going to include that link here in the show notes.
Yeah, and what that guide's going to do, it's going to teach you some of the automations that we put in our business that honestly has allowed us to make 5 figures a month practically on autopilot, because as you'll hear in future episodes, we haven't really been able to work since we got this house.
We've been working on the house, that's for sure.
It's not on the business, and the business is still making money. So that's a really important topic to help you get started in being able to build something like that. So as Justin mentioned, the links to literally everything that we've mentioned will be in the show notes and in the description. But yeah, make sure to subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
See you all soon.